Sakura, the most hated female character in Naruto. Maybe the most hated female character in all fiction? Maybe. When we look at critiques of Sakura, we see statements like these. She didn't have character development, she only had power development. Those two aren't the same. Sakura gives terrible messages to the audience. She is a superficial, brainless, annoying, horrible person that believes love is just about looks and isn't good or grateful to anyone except Sasuke just because he is too hot. Average Sakura hater, am I right? In any case, it is a widely accepted idea that Kishimoto, the author of Naruto, is not very good at writing women. And there is very good reason for people to believe this. Sakura and Hinata, two of the most important female characters in the series, are often characterized by their simpy behavior, which much of their personality revolves around. Additionally, the vast majority of the secondary and tertiary female characters barely get any screen time or fleshing out. I agree with these takes to an extent. I certainly agree that a lot of, or in fact, most of the female characters are done extremely dirty, very dirty indeed. But at the same time, his female characters are not the dislikable, one-dimensional pieces of garbage that people make them out to be. Additionally, if Sakura is actually truly poorly written, the same logic also applies to other shonen series that are actually known for having good female characters. But before we get started, let's discuss what it actually means to be a well-written character, by taking examples from characters in other works of fiction. So what does it mean to be a good character? There are a lot of misconceptions regarding how to create a well-written character. Let's start out by discussing what doesn't necessarily make a well-written character. First of all, being a badass. You do not have to be a badass to be a well-written, well-fleshed-out character. It would be nice if our character was a badass, but they don't have to be. Being a badass or being really cool sometimes comes as a consequence of being well-written. Secondly, being strong. In a similar vein to before, a character does not have to be strong to be a good, well-written character. I'm a big fan of Yoruichi Shihoin and Mereoreona Vermilion as much as anyone else, believe me, but it's not their strength that makes them well-written characters. They are in fact very flat characters that are relatively uncomplicated and do not go through much character development, if any at all. Thirdly, being likable. Likability does not dictate a well-written character. Don't get me wrong, people like well-written characters, but just because a character is likable doesn't make them well-written. Some of the most dislikable characters in fiction are actually dislikable because they're well-written. Look at Dolores Umbridge. Fourthly, and finally, one does not need to have a linear progression. We have to consider that a character is a person. People may learn something of value, and using that lesson, do something completely ridiculous, and the same applies to characters. So what does actually constitute a well-written, convincing character? Different people say all kinds of different things, like give them a backstory, or make them have interactions with background characters, or make them believable, and all sorts of things. While I do agree with all of them to an extent, you have to remember that these things are not the end-all be-all. For example, just because a character doesn't have a backstory doesn't necessarily make them badly written, and contrarily, just because a character has a backstory doesn't mean they're well written. Look at the vast majority of isekai protagonists. They have backstories, but are they well written? Anyway, after much thought and much research, I have come up with just one criterion that I will use in this video to determine whether a character is convincing. I specifically chose convincing as the threshold because well-written isn't really quantifiable, whereas convincing is more black and white. The criterion is they behave like a real person with their character and personality when presented with a given situation. The reason I picked this is because it encompasses a lot of other criteria in one. Good characters have personality flaws because people are not perfect. Motivations and backstories are established for characters because it gives them reason to behave a certain way or another, and makes them believable, since people have desires and wants and needs in life. Characters receive character progression and development because people change and develop from their experiences in life. And all of this can be put into this criterion where, as long as the character in question behaves like a real person with the same personality and same characteristics, they are a convincing, maybe well-written character. It is under this premise that I will be conducting this analysis of the most disliked character in all of Naruto, namely Haruno Sakura. Now, I don't like Sakura. Let me make that very clear. However, I do think that she is an extremely convincing character, and I'm going to explain why. Let's get started. Anyway, I'm going to state something which I don't think people have really considered when reflecting on Sakura's actions, many of which are undoubtedly questionable. And it is that, like Naruto, Sasuke, Ino, Shikamaru, and all of the rest of them, Sakura is 13 years old when she is first introduced. She is very young compared to, let's say, Nami or Orihime in her first introduction. And hear me out, Sakura actually acts her age. Now, let's think about 13-year-olds. I'm not going to make any assumptions about you as the watcher when you were 13, but I can tell you how I was at 13. I was really cringe. Look, when Sakura is first introduced, and I think that this is something that people miss, she is clearly not written as a likable character. Neither are Naruto or Sasuke at the time, to be fair, but when Sakura is introduced, she is this self-centered asshole who degrades Naruto and sucks up to Sasuke. For example, she tells Sasuke that she envies Naruto for not having any parents, because that means he has no responsibility. It's a horrible thing to say, but while I'm not excusing her one bit, this scene serves as a reminder of Sakura's childishness and immaturity as an early teen. What people also tend to forget about that scene is that after Sasuke rebukes her for her statements, Sakura does some internal reflection. She says, maybe I should be nicer to Naruto from now on. And true, while she does commit acts of violence towards him throughout the series, never, not even once, does she mock Naruto for not having parents ever again. So I hear you say, what kind of purpose does she actually serve in the story? And the answer to all of that can be traced back to chapter 3. When Naruto makes a complaint to Iruka about being put on the same team as Sasuke, Iruka retorts that every team needs to be balanced. Sasuke was at the very top of the class, while Naruto was at the very bottom. Let's consider that again. Every team needs to be balanced. Sasuke is the best, Naruto is the worst. Logically speaking, this means that Sakura is introduced as the member of the team that is thoroughly average. Competent in her studies, not very competent on the field. This ties in with her goals in the series, which, to be perfectly honest, I'm not a fan of. When Kakashi asks her about her goals, all she wants is Sasuke, Sasuke, Sasuke. But to be the devil's advocate, let me pose 3 counterarguments. Firstly, if a male character's motivation revolved around his success with women, as in doing sexual acts with them, would he be as criticized as Sakura is? I think that if such a character existed, he would be praised by the anime community for grounding the series in reality, that some people just don't have big desires and just want to enjoy life. But you tell me, why is Denji based, but Sakura a slut? Is it because of his tragic backstory, or is it really because he's not a girl? I strongly believe that the anime community needs to take a real good look at itself, because let's face it, if Denji was a female character whose sole goal in life was to get lots and lots of sex, she would get slut-shamed into oblivion. Secondly, remember what I said a few minutes ago, that Sakura was supposed to be a very average person. That includes her motivation. She's not out to get this unattainable culmination of glory like Naruto, or to fulfill a grandiose motivation like Sasuke. When she is asked by Kakashi about future dreams, in my opinion, at least, she's not really thinking long term. She's obsessed with something for now, and that's what she wants. Lastly, a lot of people criticize Sakura for having this blind, superficial obsession with Sasuke, which is fair enough, but remember her age, she is 13. She is supposed to be an average 13-year-old with a big crush. Which of you did not have irrational crushes when you were 13? Even in the second half of the story, after the time skip, Sakura is still 16. Also, Sakura is the only member of Team 7 that does not have a backstory of any kind. It is a shame that she doesn't, but it also makes sense precisely because she is supposed to be average. She is supposed to be normal. Why would she need a backstory if her entire character is meant to be average? I would argue that characters don't necessarily need a backstory to be well written, as I mentioned before. And to highlight this, I present you Shikamaru. He has a very mundane goal, which is to live a normal life, get married, have kids, and retire. He doesn't have a backstory either. He goes through less than half the character development that Sakura does, which is something that I'll get into, by the way. But my point is that very few people in the Naruto fandom call him a poorly written character. And why is that? Now, you might tell me, well, Sakura may not be poorly written, but she doesn't have any character development. And to that, I'm going to kickstart this section with perhaps the most controversial statement in the video. I believe that Sakura is possibly, one of the most well-developed characters with the most consistent long-term character development in the entire series. To convincingly explain to you why I think so, let me do a plot recap for Sakura's character. Now, Sakura's character is often criticized for not having agency, not having a big goal. This is certainly the case to begin with. She doesn't. But again, I would argue that this is something that Kishimoto nails in the story. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it was good she didn't have a big goal. What I am saying is that Kishimoto makes her an extremely consistent and believable character within the limits of her not having a big goal. She lacks resolve when her teammates need it most, and it shows, especially throughout the first part of the story. For example, Sakura is the one who succeeds in the tree climbing exercise first. Now, instead of being like Naruto and Sasuke, who compete with each other and try their utmost to improve and better themselves, Sakura goes home. It makes perfect sense that she goes home, because she doesn't have a strong drive like the others. That has nothing to do with whether she is a boy or a girl. She just doesn't have a drive. And that reflects very well throughout the Land of Waves arc, where she does almost nothing. Because she can't. Secondly, Sakura, before the Chunin exams, is depicted as being very uncertain about whether she should take them or not. Again, it makes sense. She doesn't have a big goal, and because of that inferiority complex, she doesn't want to let her teammates down. Also, during the exams, specifically the first one, she contemplates giving up during the exam, and almost does so because she doesn't want to ruin Naruto's chances of becoming Hokage. She ponders it for his sake, not hers. While I will be the first to admit that this probably wasn't the smartest decision, it's very important to understand that it doesn't come from a place of insecurity or incompetence, but kindness. Then we get to the Force of Death, where we have one of Sakura's defining moments that signifies her character growth. I think this scene is very often misconstrued and unfairly criticized, like here.
Well, Sakura's first defining moment is when she cuts her hair in a fight despite her crush supposedly preferring longer-haired women.
Is it true what I heard? You like Sasuke too? So, I guess that means we're rivals from now on.
It's not meant for you. What the?
Nami's is when she stabs at her captor's mark etched in her skin in anger, and when she finally turns to her friends to help her and her village.
Now, this is a very good example of an argument that's not wrong, but paints the situation in a very unfairly negative light. This is because I could say the exact same thing about Nami. I could say, oh, but Nami's defining moment is her being a helpless crybaby that needs the men in her life to solve her problems because she's too weak to do it by herself. Would that be wrong? I don't think so, but I think that would be extremely disingenuous. So how would I analyze this scene of Sakura's? Well, I'd say that, despite having its flaws, this scene is one of the very first moments in which we truly get to see the person that Sakura is. Remember, we are seeing this scene not from Sakura's perspective, but from Ino's. Ino, of all people, knows how important looks are to Sakura, but she abandons that without even a moment's hesitation if it means she will be able to protect her teammates to the best of her ability. Now, her subsequent actions are a bit of a mixed bag. It's incredibly commendable and kind of impressive that Sakura does so well against three ninjas who are so much more skilled than her, especially considering that the techniques that she uses are super basic. I don't think it made her look very good that she just bit into this guy's arm as her final move. I think it makes her look pathetic. But on the flip side, it really adds to the desperation of the situation and how she'll do anything if it means she and her teammates will survive the ordeal. Additionally, as I said, she's desperate. You can't really expect a person in a tough situation to make rational decisions all of the time. That's just unreasonable. You wouldn't expect Naruto or Sasuke to make completely rational decisions in the heat of battle. Why is Sakura held up to a higher level of scrutiny?
Also, for those of you that didn't know, cutting one's hair is a very culturally significant action in Japan, signifying the end of someone's life and the beginning of another. Sakura's action has a lot of cultural and symbolic significance, and while Spooksy's video makes a very good point about Nami, the Sakura segment is nothing but a bad faith argument.
Now, before we continue, let's stop here, and let me ask you the following question. Would Sakura in the Bell test, or Sakura in the Land of Waves, have had the courage to do the same thing as Sakura in the Forest of Death? Skipping forward a little bit, we come to the beginning of the Sasuke retrieval mission. Here, Sakura begs Sasuke not to leave, and she uses various tactics to make him stay. She tells him that she thinks Team 7 is like a family to her and that nobody will benefit from revenge. She also tells him that she'll try to make every day more enjoyable for him, she'll help him with revenge, and if none of that works, she'll leave the village with him. This is an incredibly low point for Sakura. But let's also dissect her arguments. She says revenge is not going to help, but then also says she'll help him with it. She's not making any sense. She is crying and whining, and she's completely wilding. And why is that? She is desperate for Sasuke not to leave the village, not only because she likes him, but also because she doesn't want him to leave and destroy the strong relationships that the members of Team 7 have built up with each other through their many trials and tribulations. Moreover, she doesn't want to be the one who lets him go, because then she'll feel responsible for letting the team down. I think the delivery of this scene is not great. It makes her look really bad, but I honestly don't know if I can expect much more from a 13-year-old in extreme emotional distress. She is using every talking point that she has, and it shows.
These actions are a natural consequence of her feelings of helplessness during the time she spent nursing Sasuke at the hospital. She no longer knows what to do, when she has no idea how and why Sasuke is suffering.
And people forget, Sakura is able to look back on this experience and learn from it. She is able to look back at the time when, crying, she begged Naruto to bring Sasuke back for her. She looks back, reflects on her pathetic self and her uselessness, and decides to change. Without the prompting of anybody else, she asks Tsunade to train her. When she did not have to, it was her own choice. She does it not only to not let her teammates down, but also to give herself the ability to do the things that she wants to do on her own. Now compare this Sakura to the Sakura at the beginning of this arc. If that's not character development, I don't know what is.
What makes her character in the post-time skip great is the fact that you can clearly see that Sakura has developed massively as a person. I'm not talking about her strength, I'm talking about her personality. In the Gaara rescue mission, she actively asks Chiyo if there is any possibility to remove a tailed beast from a Jinchuriki. She knows that Naruto has suffered immensely because of the Nine Tails, and she wants to improve his quality of life. Would the Sakura from, for example, the beginning of the Sasuke retrieval arc have done the same? I don't think so. Later in the arc, she rebukes Sasori for his lack of concern for human life and for familial bonds. Before this arc, would she have had the emotional fortitude to verbally confront an enemy like that? I don't think so. In the Tenchi Bridge reconnaissance arc, when Sai insults Naruto for his obsession with Sasuke, Sakura beats the ever-loving crap out of him. While obviously being an incredibly satisfying moment, This shows the growth that Sakura has undergone. She has become incredibly protective of Naruto, and it's so abundantly clear that she cares so much for him. Compare that to her introduction, or even the Chunin exams. Sakura in this scene is almost completely unrecognizable from the pathetic character that she used to be. We see examples of Sakura's kindness throughout the arc, one most notable moment being when she, despite suffering from wounds inflicted on her by Kyuubi, Naruto, lies to him about who actually did it so as to not hurt his feelings. She also asks Yamato whether she can learn the wood release jutsu so that she would be able to better protect Naruto in the future. Later in this arc, after Sasuke leaves them a second time, Naruto collapses to the ground, feeling helpless and weak. Who's the one who berates him? Who's the one who gives him courage? Who's the one who encourages him and stands by his side? None other than Sakura. She and Naruto have switched their roles. Naruto, who before was the savior, now is the helpless one. Sakura, who before was the helpless one, now is his savior. In a moment that beautifully parallels the one from the original Sasuke retrieval arc, and Kishimoto isn't exactly subtle about it, Sakura is now able to properly stand by Naruto's side, so that they can confront their ordeals together. If this isn't character development, again, I don't know what is. Much later in the story, Sakura gets another defining moment. During the Five Kage Summit, Sakura goes up to Naruto and tells him that she loves him. The thing is, it's a lie. Now, there is a reason why Sakura said what she said. She said this because she mistakenly believed that Naruto was going to extreme lengths to bring back Sasuke for her sake and for her sake only. What Naruto was essentially doing was putting himself at risk of being prosecuted by other countries, which Sakura saw firsthand when the Cloud Ninjas beat him up. Subtlety is not Naruto's forte, and nobody knows that better than Sakura. It's a natural progression for her to think this, and for her to want to stop his almost self-destructive behavior that she's been forced to witness time and time again. I'm going to repeat again. I don't like Sakura. The reason I don't like Sakura is because even though her intentions are good, she very frequently manages to make the worst decisions known to man. Like her screwed up statement at the very start of the series, this decision is one of those instances. I'm not going to go into it very much, but trust me when I say, I know how much it hurts to be told by someone who you really like that they like you, only for that statement to be clearly false or promptly retracted because they never actually meant what they said. Believe me, I know. So I need you to believe me when I say, Sakura's statement is stupid, is not well thought out in the slightest, and even if Naruto had believed her, it would not have ended well. However, it is very important to note that her stupid statement does not come from a place of malice. She's not out here saying, let's make Naruto feel really shitty. If anything, she is willing to sacrifice her own happiness so that Naruto can finally be at peace. Even this is character development. Sakura has been shown to be protective of Naruto before, and now she is willing to give up her own romantic success, which, by the way, was her main goal at the start of the series, for the sake of somebody else's peace of mind. It's stupid. It's not going to work. Don't get me wrong, I'm not excusing her in any way. The execution was completely horrible, and Naruto, thankfully, reprimands her for it. But while her decision is foolish beyond belief perhaps, it came from a place of a deep platonic love for Naruto, something that we see is very well developed throughout the series, as I've illustrated. It is a shame that this was the decision that she came to. It's flawed, but above all, I think it's deeply human. I would say she redeems herself right after, as she plans to kill Sasuke by herself. Again, a little bit ambitious, but in a way it is quite noble that she tries her best to not make her teammate suffer and to step up to wear the dishonorable mantle of being a murderer. A murderer, in fact, of their close teammate. Sakura truly comes into her own during the war arc, I'd say. She is an extremely valuable asset that is responsible for the well-being of the entire Allied army, and my god, she plays a crucial role in keeping Naruto alive. How do you look at that and still call her useless? Without her, the main character would probably have died. Arguably, yes. Her seal release, maybe it was a bit of an asshole. However, it's not one that I personally am super unhappy about, because it would make sense that she would inherit her teacher's ultimate technique. It would make no sense for someone like Kiba to use that technique, but Sakura having access to it makes sense. We should have had more of a build-up to it though, in my opinion, but the same could be said for the majority of the other members of the Konoha 11. In any case, when Sakura says she's finally caught up to Naruto and Sasuke, in a way, it's true. I don't mean this in the sense that she's as strong as them, it's about how she's finally able to stand on the same battlefield as them, walk side by side with them, and how she's finally able to help them in a significant way. She's able to make meaningful contributions in the battle against the most powerful entity in the world. And while she may not have been the most important player on that field, they certainly wouldn't have been able to seal Kaguya Otsuki without her. And when Naruto and Sasuke fight for one last time, it's not Kakashi, but Sakura who comes to save them and to unite them as one group once again. Sakura has changed from that whiny, gutless brat that we saw in part 1, and now has become the rock of Team 7. Although I will be the first to admit that many of her actions are thoughtless or stupid, it's very obvious that she goes through a ton of development. Now, as I've said repeatedly throughout this video, I personally don't like Sakura, and here's why. Throughout the story, Sakura, while being a relatively resourceful character, manages to make sometimes the most reprehensible and or stupid decisions I've ever seen. I've talked about one already, her telling Naruto she likes him, which by all intents and purposes was dumb. However, in analyzing her actions, we also have to understand Sakura's character. As can be seen in the entire story, she's not someone who thinks very deeply about the consequences before she says or does something. She's the shoot first and ask questions later kind of person. She's not a bad person with malicious intentions, she's just very impulsive. I personally don't like people like that, which is why Sakura is not my favorite character. What's fundamentally important to note, however, is that dislike of a character is, at the end of the day, purely personal. For example, I was not the biggest fan of Hitsugaya from Bleach to begin with, because he was an extremely reckless character. That does not mean he's badly written, because 1, it makes sense for his character, being a relatively young Shinigami, and 2, you see him develop into a more mature, calculated captain throughout the course of the story. This is something that people need to understand, is that just because you or I don't like a specific character, does not make that character badly written. That just makes the character dislikable to you or to me. However, while I personally do not like Sakura, I would not say that she is a bad person. In fact, I would even go as far to say she's a very kind person. I don't want this video to go on for too long, though, so let's sum it up by looking at what this Reddit user says. Sakura is the type of character that has no problem calling herself out and changing her ways to better herself. She was that way since the very beginning. Now, I'd like to say, there are people that believe that Sakura, as well as many other side characters, had a lot of potential that ended up getting wasted, so let's address them. Sakura was, quote-unquote, set up to be great at genjutsu, and people were unhappy that she did not end up being an illusionist. The thing is, I do believe that Kishimoto ended up making the right decision. How is someone like Sakura, a relatively normal person with no bloodline limits, supposed to measure up against Sharingan users in illusions? How? Tell me, she would have been Kurenai version 2. On the other hand, with healing, Sakura could efficiently utilize her acute chakra control to the maximum benefit of the team. How is that a bad choice on Kishimoto's part? I've seen people criticize the fact that a lot of Naruto's women are healers. The so-called trope of fighting men, healing women, which for some reason people perceive as Kishimoto depicting women as incompetent or weak. The thing is, being good at healing isn't a bad thing, like at all. In fact, it means that you are much better at fine chakra control than other people. It doesn't mean you're weak or inept at fighting. In fact, it is the exact opposite. Look at, I don't know, Hashirama, look at Kabuto. Hell, look at Tsunade, the most valuable asset on the 5 Kage team in the fight against Madara, or Sakura, or Chiyo, who routinely proved themselves to be competent in battle, not least because of their healing abilities and their acute chakra control. However, I do completely understand the frustration with this specific topic. Even though a lot of the female characters in the series are not healers by their primary classification, it is still the truth that a lot of the female characters do end up healing their male comrades. So I wish Kishimoto had given them a little bit more variation. But I also just want you to remember that while that may be frustrating, being good at healing is definitely not a bad thing. What I will say is valid criticism of Sakura's characterization is that she does not nearly have as much development or screen time as Naruto or Sasuke, as well as her lack of character moments. Very few moments in the series actually focus on Sakura and her development, which makes it very difficult for the reader or watcher to track her growth and progress as a person. That, I will say, is a reasonable take. The story primarily focuses on the intertwining of fates of Naruto and Sasuke, the clash between light and dark, sun and moon, and ultimately between coexistence and solitude. It is sad that Sakura doesn't really have a part to play in all of this. But also, I'm afraid it's not as simple as she should have had more screen time and more development, period. Because imagine if she did. The story would be far more bloated than it already is, and people would be complaining about that. Naruto, the series, is fundamentally about Naruto, surprisingly or not, and his relationships with everyone around him. The most notable of those being the one with Sasuke, who he develops a very brotherly connection to. Sakura, at the end of the day, matters very little to the overall narrative, the overall plot of the story. Don't get me wrong though, in an ideal world, I would have loved to have seen more from Sakura, and a lot of other side characters too. The issue is, I'm afraid with such a huge cast, it's so incredibly difficult to satisfy the screen time needs of each and every single character. It's just not possible. That definitely applies to Naruto. But you can also see that in Bleach, and you can see that so much in One Piece. The problem that Bleach avoids much better than Naruto or One Piece is the fact that when characters are not relevant to the story, they're not there. And the same applies to Sakura to an extent. When she is not relevant to the story, she's usually not in it, and when she is not relevant to the story and she's still there, usually she shows some personal growth that she's done. I'm personally a big fan of Kuchiki Lutia, because not only do I think she's well written, she is also a very relevant character throughout the story. So in conclusion, Sakura obviously is not a poorly written character, at least by the metric of being a realistic person. She goes through a hell of a lot of character development throughout the series, and whether or not you like her, her personality, or her actions, you must admit that she is a completely believable, understandable, and above all, convincing character. I personally think a majority of this hatred towards Sakura stems from the anime adaptation. A lot of manga moments in which Sakura is useful are cut down, and in the flashback fillers, she's quite often depicted as a bully, when in the actual storyline of the manga, none of this ever happens. Studio Pierrot really hated this pink-haired kunoichi, it seems. Kishimoto wrote a very multifaceted character in Sakura, because he didn't write a female character, he wrote a character. While I can understand people calling Hinata disappointing, I fundamentally cannot understand the same case being made for Sakura. Sure, she may have been done dirty in terms of screen time or character development compared to Naruto or Sasuke, but if she was a male character, I'm pretty sure far less people would write Sakura off as badly written. But what do you think? Do you agree or disagree with my takes? Do you agree about what it takes to make a well-written character? Let me know down in the comments below. Just be respectful about it. While you're at it, be sure to like and subscribe. I'd appreciate that so much. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.